Welcome to Parallel Barking. Happy October. This is your host, Ariana Becker, with another host,
Larry Becker, woof woof.
Mark Bark.
Happy Oktoberfest.
Happy October. We are talking today about Putin's escapades, claiming Ukrainian regions for his own. What a surprise.
He didn't claim Ukrainian regions for his own.
Of course he did. He annexed 4 regions in
He did
eastern
not
and
annex.
southern.
He did not annex them. This is a carefully performed theater piece.
Oh,
It
okay.
involves a
Okay.
referendum.
Before
The warm
the
embrace of people who signed pieces of paper that indicated their
all right,
will to rejoin.
no. Let me explain
I
what
mean, if you're going to
everybody else
talk
sees this
opera,
as right now.
if you're going to talk opera, then you have to be operatic, and this was opera.
Yes, it absolutely was. But what Putin is calling it is annexing the 4 regions, okay? And everybody else is calling it an illegal land grab.
Yeah, blah blah.
The regions, of course, he's going to say that he's going to defend it. I mean, I don't see how this is any different than what he's already been doing.
Well, there's a reason for this.
Please do tell us.
I mean, the whole problem for Mr. Putin has been his ability to do a semi-credible job, at least at the beginning, and now a horrible job of projecting force onto territory. What he's done, what he's had a miserable time with, is controlling the narrative of the invasion. Even the use of my term suggests his utter defeat in this fourth, fifth, or sixth generation, depending on where you classify this, fourth, fifth, or sixth generation warfare tactic, which is control of the narrative. Which, by the way, there's been a recent semi-distribution from the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff. I think it's, well, I forget the number, but on the critical importance of narrative control in warfare. It's a critical area of strategic consideration now, whether the Americans can do a better job than the Russians.
It's always been. I mean, not now.
No, it's bigger in the sense that it's being rationalized and weaponized in ways that it hadn't been before, and people have been thinking about it more. But anyway, so he's done a terrible job with that. The fact that we continue to call it an invasion and all of these things. The other problem is, of course, that as long as he is viewed as projecting power outside of Russia, that is not fighting a defensive war against evil invaders, he is stuck, at least discursively, behind the 8 ball, since one of the things that has really been, again, this is narrative and meaning-making control, has been now absorbed by most of the world's population, is that defensive wars are good and non-defensive wars are at best suspicious and at worst really bad.
But how is this defense? Annexation is not defense.
Exactly. Yes, it is.
How?
If you annex these regions, then whose country is it? Russia. I'm not talking about whether it's legal or not, whether anyone's going to recognize it, but this is his thinking. So if he annexes all of these places, when the Ukrainian forces go in there, then he can say, at least in his own mind, that it is the Ukrainians who are invading Russian territory. So he's going to flip the narrative. And on that basis, he can use all kinds of power to
really all you're doing is explaining the rationale of a crazy person.
Well, that's the cards that we've been handed on the global stage. Whether you call them crazy, narcissistic, idiotic, brilliant, is irrelevant. What is relevant is that by flipping this, at least in his own mind, he now believes that he has an excuse to use, for example, things like technical nuclear weapons.
But what I think is funny,
they're going to be used in the defense of the motherland.
What
now,
I think
no one on earth is going to believe him except maybe 50 million Russians, but there you go. And I know there's more than 50 million Russians. That's my point. So go ahead.
What I think is funny is that although everybody, most know that this is completely illegal and ridiculous and a farce, that
in the West
will go through the motions and have another vote and say this is definitely illegal. We are
Well,
going.
he's really, look, he's really smart. The West has backed itself into a corner, one that the Chinese have been exploiting as they begin to develop really robust theories of endogenous democracy.
Yeah,
And that is, the West has conflated, not the West. I mean, this is reductionist,
yeah,
essentializing.
exactly. You're
Um,
being a little.
well, no, and I complain about it bitterly when it's used this way. Those who tend to control the official means for expressing definitive views in a representative capacity for the billions of people who make up the Anglo-European and developing state West. The people who control the newspapers, the people who are in high positions in the governmental apparatus, the usual suspects.
Right.
Right? All of those people
Yes.
who pass for our representative leaders and therefore have been delegated the responsibility to or the authority to speak for us. All of them have invested in this bizarrely two-dimensional way in the theatrics of elections. We love them. We've based everything on it. Think about the January 6th committee and Mr. Trump's anti-January 6th agitprop stuff all around elections. And so the entirety of the way in which we view legitimacy as an expression of popular will, we don't really care what happens after this eruption, this eruptive moment in the form of an election. That is the definitive means for legitimating something. And it's been for a long time, Soviet regimes, Soviet Marxist-Leninist regimes have been using the form of elections as a way of covering whatever it is that they were doing that had been decided irrespective of elections, saying, well, you Western people, all you think about are elections. Well, you want elections, here's the election. And then we have these huge battles over, well, when we said elections, we mean elections that are real elections. And here's this laundry list of things that make for a real election. And here's this laundry list of things that don't. But the minute you do that, you get sucked in.
Well,
Right?
don't you say you could? I mean, you could say that for any tool that.
Well, but that's the point. We don't believe this is a tool. We believe this is a sacred expression of the divine will of the masses expressed through a mechanism that itself, like the magisterium in a Roman Catholic Church, infused with the Holy Spirit and therefore acquiring some kind of sacral quality, which is nice. And it's very useful for maintaining stability and prosperity, blah, blah, blah. And it accords with a lot, and it resonates a lot with some core notions that are central to our civilization, certainly from the Roman period, of which we are the heirs. Right, but that's putting that aside. So what he does is he's exploiting this to make this case for his own purposes, because he wants now to turn what is an aggressive war into a defensive war, and therefore gives him permission to use all kinds of nasty things and continue to commit what the Ukrainians and everyone else calls war crimes. He would call, no, this is exuberance in the defense of the motherland, right? But by doing this, what he's attempting to do is muddy the waters,
right,
and muddy the picture. Not, of course, he's not muddying anything with respect to well-read elites in Berlin or Washington or even Seattle, but where he's looking to muddy the waters is precisely where he needs to muddy the waters. And that is all of those places through which he can move his goods, services, and people and avoid Western sanctions. So he doesn't give a damn whether the Americans buy this or the European Union buys this. He cares that this is enough of a cover so that he can find a number of states that are willing to turn a blind eye or willing to take a little bit of money or willing on principle to now view him and his cause favorably enough so that they will disregard American, European, Japanese sanctions. And that's the point. So it's actually very clever. Everyone believes, because the West is very narcissistic, that Putin is talking to them or Putin is talking to the Ukrainians. And what they forget is that he's not talking to them at all. He's playing them, certainly. And the Western press is probably one of the easiest things on earth to play. certainly in the way in which their owners allow them to operate. But he's really playing countries that are not them, all of those countries that have yet to impose sanctions, all of those countries that either abstain or disappear during UN votes, all of those countries that express some doubts secretly or privately. That's what he's looking for. And to that extent, and it's not him, I mean, who knows where he is mentally, or whether it's an act. I mean, this is well above my pay grade. But even putting him out of the equation, if I'm looking to for this thing to survive, at least to produce some kind of credible end of this thing that doesn't send the Russian system down the toilet, then I need to do things like this. He'd already begun doing this, for example, with the lifeline that was thrown to him by the Iranians and the Indians, that little Silk Road down. That made the American and European sanctions less effective, and of course the Chinese. But the Chinese is his deal with the Chinese is dealing with the devil. The Chinese are dealing from a position of strength, and it's making him quite uncomfortable. He still remembers his history lessons, that's in which for 50 years the Russians, that is in the form of the Soviets, were dominating their Chinese communist brothers, putting aside the racism inherent in that, although the Chinese won't. He finds himself in the uncomfortable position of the student now becoming the master, and he hates that, so he's looking for some other way out, and his way out is south.
I feel like that colors the entire reason he is invading Ukraine. He's tired of being the student and wants to be the master of all.
No, that's the invasion was a bunch of, it's very different. It's a very different pathology, and it's a pathology born of an extraordinary corruption and projection of a particular view of history, historical imperatives, historical honor. And again, this is very essentializing and reductionist, but it's not my essentialization or reductionism, it's theirs, which then requires the reflowering of a Russian empire, going back to the lands that the Russians, if some Russian went to the bathroom in the Caucasus, then that must be Russian imperial territory and therefore is Russian forever. The thing that makes that appealing, of course, is that there are a number of countries with territorial claims grounded in empires that are long gone, that even though they're very quiet about this, that would not cry very much if the Russians were able to succeed, because then it would, by military victory, would then substantially, in their eyes at least, would substantially up the legitimacy of their own claims, that if some dynasty 1,000 years ago sent a caravan and said, oh my God, this is mine, then it is theirs eternally, right? So there's all kinds of things that are going on in this thing, besides the farce of the referendum, besides the absolutely lunatic, at least from the Western perspective, annexation speech, and despite the very clever narrative controlling response that President Zelensky put out in two speeches, one on September 30th and one on October 1st, one of them mocking the referendum and the other one suggesting, well, be careful what you wish for, Russia. We've now accelerated our application for NATO. But that's a different story, and one that actually makes me quite annoyed, but we'll get there.
Why are you annoyed about their application into NATO?
Because how can I put this in a politic way? I guess there's no putting it in a politic way.
Yeah, you already broke the seal.
No, yeah. Here, and it starts with everyone's favorite demon overlord in the United States, Mr. Trump, right? Who's now being transformed into some demon creature, nothing of which can be viewed positively.
I mean, he's been.
Yeah. No, the process is not done. It'll be done after an indictment, a humiliating trial, and perhaps who knows what. But the thing is going forward, and we'll see how that plays out. I've got nothing to say about that. That's bizarrely it's bizarrely over the top politics that has its own concerns, but not in this context. All right. So getting back to him, Mr. Trump in a lot of ways was like, you know, in the fantasy novels that you read, there's always, especially if it's like this faux medieval thing, there's always, or this magic thing, there's always this absolutely crazy person who is, you know, half impossible to understand, but who has a gift for being quite prophetic or oracular from time to time. And then everyone sits and tries to interpret the oracular pronouncement that comes out of a person that 3/4 of the time appears to be a poster child for the evils of untreated Tourette syndrome. And to some extent, Mr. Trump served that purpose. There were a number of things, which is why a substantially and surprisingly number of policies from the Trump administration continue to be carried over in the Biden administration. But again, that's a different podcast. So he's got this oracular thing, but he just can't, you know, and then he goes back to him in ways that that, you know, either people love it or hate it.
So what does this have to do with Zelensky and NATO?
Let me get there, but I needed to because we live in very sensitive times. I need to kind of lay a little bit of a groundwork. So even if you take that position of Mr. Trump, that is that whether or not you believe he's a demon overlord, there were some things that he was saying, either because he knew or despite himself, that actually were quite prophetic or oracular. And one of the things that fall into that category is his sense about NATO. Bureaucratized, a group of toddlers in uniform playing soldier in houses whose toys are becoming more derelict by the minute, thinking in real life that their purpose was really over with the fall of the Soviet Union, and allowing themselves not only to be bureaucratized, but to decay. And to be very, very, very 20th century in the way in which they view their mission, in the way in which they view their operations. It's basically a bunch of aristocratic lordlings at the middle of the 18th century pretending that they're real soldiers. And that's the problem. And so when Zelensky says, well, you know, thank you, Russia, you really now pushed us into Europe, the next thing you hear is a bunch of, I don't want to say up there behinds, because that's impolitic and bad, and so I won't say that, but a bunch of leaders and influencers almost immediately said, well, this isn't going to happen. We continue to have all of these concerns about Ukraine and NATO and blah, blah, blah. And they continue to regurgitate arguments, and I mean regurgitate in the worst possible way, arguments that were made in the 20th century without any sense of how things have changed now. And so what winds up happening is that, in a sense, these people wind up doing Putin's work for him in a context in which the annexation then makes it easier for him to continue doing what he's doing without any additional support. And ultimately, this gets back, and the last thing I'm going to say about this gets back to my sense about the original position of the West, which I believe is still the position among those who are now keeping their mouths shut, but who tend to run things on our behalf, not with my consent, and certainly not with my vote, but who still do it in ways that are that they believe is, because their minds are very strange things, as close to God-given as you can get. And that was my wind-up to where it is they're going, and that is that they would like to see, at the end of the day, a partitioning of Ukraine, and that Putin has effectively given them exactly what they wanted. They now have the basis for a deal. And they believe that what they can do is pretend to invite Zelensky into the EU, into Europe, into the EU and NATO. Putin has done this, and now they're going to go and begin to coerce Mr. Zelensky to pretend that he's a Polish king in the 18th century, and it's time for the first partition, or actually the second partition of Ukraine. The first occurred with Crimea in 2014, and that disgusts me. It's in any number of ways that we don't have time for in this podcast. But in a sense, what you wind up seeing here, and this is not reported anywhere in the press, what you wind up seeing here, I think, is a kind of parallel motion where certain people who claim leadership, and they may have it formally, but in my sense of it is that's all they have. Align their interests and hopes because they don't want to be cold, they don't want to make a sacrifice, and they believe that leadership is costless. And certainly leadership of the world, that their interests now appear to align with the quote unquote narrative facts that Mr. Putin is making, even with this sham theater of an annexation. And that is horrifying. And Mr. Zelensky, who sees this as well, I believe, is poking the tiger and saying, well, I'm going to call you on this. And so all kinds of things are bound up in what appears to be a fairly simple and stupid thing, Mr. Putin's operatic, farcical annexation. But all kinds of things are really bound up in it, and some of it fairly sophisticated.
To me, it just seems like an interruption.
I wish you were right. Only, I mean, we're going to find out one way or another, right? Because this thing is going to play out.
Well, I mean, it's just he's still in Ukraine. Russia's still in Ukraine. They're still in the middle of a war. I don't know.
They are, and we are continuing to supply the Ukrainians with a tremendous amount of arms.
Yes. Besides controlling the narrative, I understand.
Don't put it down. Don't put that down. I mean, for me, this is a critical part. You can win a land war and lose everything if you don't control narrative.
Yeah. I mean,
you know, but I get your point, because what you see is if you focus just on this, then this becomes more evidence of the crazy circus, an asylum in that purports to be the leadership of the Kremlin. On the other hand, it's a very effective asylum because they seem to have a very significant knack for holding on to power. And so maybe it's less of an asylum than we think, and our problem is that we're not really seeing them with the lenses that we need to understand the way they're embedded within their society. But yeah, from our perspective, this is just nonsensical and stupid. But I'm suggesting that beyond the obvious, which is, at least as far as the Anglo-European West is concerned, this is a non-starter, and in fact, it's pathetic. Beyond that, there are other kinds of things that may be in play as well. And one of them is a Western thing, which is Mr. Putin is now providing more of the kind of context that may make it possible for those of our leaders in our part of the world to then strong arm the Ukrainians. And who knows, they'll
into
make
negotiation.
Yeah, well, not into negotiation, but into partition. That's the thing. Negotiation is a euphemism. Let's be very, very clear.
You're right. So you're saying that everybody in the world except for Ukraine wants the Ukraine partitioned?
No, I think that there are a significant number of leaders in the Anglo-European world who quietly, because they can't do it anymore, because they know that that's the way of losing elections for the moment. But we'll see what happens after a cold
winter. They just
winter.
want it partitioned.
They're looking for a way to do this because they believe that that's a magic ticket to make this thing go away. And since we don't value Ukrainians as much as we value voters who are waiting to vote us in or out in the next election, right. Then we can, as we sacrificed the Poles 200 years ago,
right.
We will sacrifice them. After all, it wasn't but 15, 20 years ago we didn't like them very much, at least according to our the apparatus of our press organs, and who knows where that was coming from. That we can sacrifice them, and partition is cool. And that is something that the leaders who are moving us in that direction. They've gone underground to some extent. That really needs to be exposed and discussed, at least in the liberal democratic West, where those sorts of views ought to be tested within the crucible of democratic debate, open and transparent democratic debate, because that is in fact our system. And what
that's never going to happen.
Then we've got another problem, right? And it's a deeper one. And that problem is what we do with this incrustation of quote unquote leaders who now appear to impede the effective and appropriate operation of a liberal democratic state.
Well, and I think
that's a podcast for another day.
It's about what you were saying before, the worship of voting, the worship of getting into office, of being, of that
it's
whole...
a performance. Yeah, it's just a performance of elections, right? Because once you vote, then the voter has you've used them up, and they cease to be a factor in the operation of the state. Right, that's the nature of elections. So you court them, you do all kinds of things, and then once you have their vote, well, you've used them up, the way you use up labor.
Yeah, this is the new aristocracy.
And then off you go, and then who gets to involve themselves intimately in the operation of the state? Those with the money and influence, staying power, and interest, to make it worth their while to constantly seek to try to gain entry into the administrative and elective apparatus of the state in order to influence them. You and I, who have to work for a living, would find that difficult, because then we'd have to choose between doing that full time or feeding ourselves. And that becomes impossible. And it becomes, to some extent, an industry, and it becomes an interest affected thing, with respect to which there's been an extraordinary and actually quite good and sophisticated academic writing, certainly for the last 70 or 80 years. And this is all well-known terrain. But what we tend not to do is put the two pieces together. The consumption of voting on the one hand, and then the disposability of voters on the one hand, and then the way in which actual consultative democratic activity within the apparatus is really limited to an elite group of people who can afford it. But that's a different podcast. For me, that's important here, because those people then have the maneuvering room to do what they've been telling us they've been wanting to do since February, which is to make this all go away by giving the Russians a little bit of territory, and then they think this is done. And we know how that goes. We have examples for the last 300 years.
Well, yeah, I mean, so what about the annexation of Crimea? Like, what?
You mean the so-called annexation of Crimea? The so-called annexation of Crimea.
Yes. I mean, Russia's efforts in eastern Ukraine, a series of improvisations in response to, frictions and political warfare.
Yeah, and I think they did something similar in Ukraine. Ukraine is even worse from my perspective. And there the blame falls solely on the Obama administration. They set a very bad precedent. And now we are reaping the whirlwind here. And, that administration did a lot of good and some interesting things. This was not the high point of the administration. Allowing that line to get crossed.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. Setting a precedent. This is I feel like this is going to happen like every 10, 20 years.
Right, which is why I said that was the first partition of Ukraine with the nodding approval. So what did the Russians see? What they saw with the Obama administration saying, naughty, naughty Russia, here's some sanctions. And from the Russian perspective, this is, okay, so I'm paying a civil penalty for annexing Crimea. So basically the aggregate present value of the lifetime cost to me of these civil penalties is what the West believes is the value of Crimea, and that is the selling price that the West has set for Crimea. Cool. Now we'll do the same thing for other parts.
Yeah, cost benefit analysis.
It's
I
not
think
cost benefit analysis. It's markets for territory. This is cost benefit analysis. This is what a prostitute does when she figures out how much money she or he is earning versus the amount of fines they have to pay when they're brought in by cops who are not corruptible. And they say, well, if it's $1,000 fine, but I'm bringing in $8,000 a week. Well, that's the cost of doing business.
that's also a cost benefit analysis.
And now I understand the price, right? I understand the price, and so, yeah. So yeah, the Ukrainian annexation is extraordinary theater. But again, the problem with theater is that it tends to be distracting. It takes our minds off of other things, and sometimes theater has a moral and a purpose. In this case, the very the very clumsiness of the theater, which was, I mean, they knew it wasn't even worth taking the time and effort to stage this right, made it clear that that wasn't the point. The point was something else. Still, it also shows that the Russians don't value narrative as much as others, and it also shows how that is going to cost them in the end, because it really isn't clear that the partition people, most famously Henry Kissinger for a while, until his better angels or someone went and prevailed on him to maybe tone that down. We're all about, let's bargain some land for peace. But it's still, the jury's out. It may be that other factions that also have significant influence in enough of the liberal democratic states may make the partitioners unable to do what they want. But what it does do at a minimum is, if Putin can't get anything else, as long as he keeps the West divided, both internally within states and between the allies, he's bought something.
Yeah.
And this theater of annexation is meant to do just that. Plus, of course, what he's just done, again, talking about elections, as a reward to the Italians for electing a so-called right-wing government, he cut off their, I think it's their gas supply. He did this yesterday or the day before. So, we're
going to talk about that in our next podcast. It was the Nord Stream lines.
Yeah. So
actually, hold up. We don't know who did that.
No. You're teasing our audience here. We're going to get to that. But yeah, I mean, what else? What's your other sense with respect to this whole drama? I'm done. Last words?
Well, I'm just
you're throwing up your hands and going, good God. Yeah.
It's just
yeah, we all are.
Yeah, I don't know. Like I said before, it kind of feels like not that I knew this was going to happen, but it felt like this was something that was definitely very possible after Crimea. And
and I feel like I'm watching a free performance of French absurdist theater from the post-war
and
period.
It never seems like,
I mean, it's
anything that happens in that UN General Assembly or the NATO referendums or anything like that is ever going to do anything. It's just for show. You're right, and it's incredibly annoying. Like, I don't want to see that. I don't care about what.
But on the other hand, you should be grateful. This is classic French high intellectual farce, and they didn't charge you an admission fee.
You're right.
Wait. Yes, they did.
We get to
the inflation rate is not.
Yeah, what are you talking about?
We're paying a lot for this theater. We're paying a lot for this, for the amusement of our I can't say that they're demon or alien demon overlords, our overlords who continue to appear to take human form.
You know how much I'm paying for gas?
Oh no, that's yet
almost
another
$6. That's
all right. Woof woof.
Bark bark. Thanks everybody. We'll see you next time.